Dogworks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dogworks. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. You can support this podcast on patreon.com/firstpawmedia.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small-batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto. You're listening to our daily coverage of the 2022 Iditarod here on Mushing Radio on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site, and you can find all of our episodes over on dogworksradio.com or wherever you're listening to your podcasts. And today I'm joined by my co-host, Toni Reitter. She's calling from the Kenai Peninsula here in Alaska. Toni, how's it going?
It's very wet today. We had one of our spring snows. So it was snow this morning. It's turned to rain. Everything is slush. It's disgustingly gray, but it's Iditarod, so it's still a good day.
It is a good day, and we are receiving a lot of that same snow that you guys are. We've probably got near a foot since we were on air last night, and not only does that affect travel down here and folks getting to and fro, but it also is affecting folks on the Iditarod Trail. What do you know?
Well, so far we've really heard a lot about the snow in McGrath. Watching the live feed all day, it poured buckets, as I once heard a little girl say. It was pouring buckets of snow all day today in McGrath, to the point where Iditarod Insider and the Iditarod Air Force could not fly in or out because of the weather. So we're kind of in the dark as far as what's going on further up the trail. They do have a camera in Ophir. It snowed there this morning. It tapered off in the afternoon. I'm not sure if it was raining or if it was just done precipitating. But there were reports from the mushers on that trail that it was starting to become a slog fest. It's a slog fest for the back of the pack going into McGrath. And judging by the speed and the race time of the front runners, especially Brent Sass going from Ophir to Cripple, I'm assuming that the trail is just as nasty from Ophir to Cripple. We just don't have any reports out of there yet because of the weather keeping Insider and other media from being able to get that far up the trail.
And speaking of working their way up the trail, we're looking at the standings right now. And as you mentioned, Brent Sass currently in first place. And he is where you had mentioned on the trail there in Cripple. And that is followed up by Kaylin Davis. One of our musher profiles of the evening is currently in 49th place. We're happy to report that everybody is still on the trail. No scratches or anything yet. And that's a great sign, isn't it, Toni? Here we are well over a third of the race. And typically we have a scratch or two at this time, especially on that rough section of the trail where everybody seemed to have made it relatively unscathed. Is that right?
Yeah, I cannot, and I didn't have time to look it up, but I'm very curious. I cannot remember a time when we didn't have a scratch this far into the race. Everybody's out of, like you said, out of the twisty, turny, nasty part that we always hear about in the mountain range. But I cannot think of a time when teams made it all the way to Nikolai and still no scratches. So It's really exciting to see. I think part of it is trail conditions. I think part of it is hardy dog teams and mushers who are willing to take the beating, because everything I've heard, sleds took a beating and mushers took a beating. Dogs are doing great on the first third of the race, and we'll know a little more about the second third coming up hopefully in the next day or two.
And we've been talking the last couple of days about the 24-hour rest, and that is one of the required rests. And then, of course, they have 2 mandatory 8s, and then whatever other rest that they need along the trail does not count against them, quote unquote, from their required time. And that's a huge part of strategy on how much rest they're going to do and where they're doing it, whether it's on the trail or in the checkpoints or whatever. As we stand right now, there's only one green check mark on the leaderboard, and that's Matt Failer, who has declared his 24. But you had mentioned that there are many others that are probably going to have that green check mark by the time we're off the air tonight or soon after. Is that right?
That's right. Aaron Burmeister is sitting in McGrath. He's actually counting down the minutes right now as we are talking here before he can leave. I didn't do the differential to know exactly when he's going to leave, but it should be within the next 10 to 15 minutes if my guesstimation is correct, which we all know I'm bad at math. So don't take my word for it, other than I know it's getting close. A lot of teams chose to rest in McGrath. Now, statistically and historically, the winner is not in McGrath if they've taken their 24 in McGrath. I think in at least recent history, no champion took their 24 in McGrath. So it's a calculated risk, I think, on Aaron's part. He told Insider he chose to do that because when he landed in McGrath, it was just not going to work out strategy-wise to continue on down the trail with the heat and the trail conditions for his dogs. Their rest schedule would just not work with the trail conditions. So he chose to give them rest now, and then he's going to do a similar run, it sounds like, to what Brent Sass and Dallas Seavey have run, and head up to Cripple. And he, in theory, should be in Cripple around the time Brent Sass is getting ready to leave off of his 24. So it should be an interesting strategy, and it really depends on how Brent's team recovers from their very long run today. I think it took him something like 12 hours to go from Ophir to Cripple, when you really on that run, the front runners really want to stick to 10 hours, not 12. So
very good.
We'll see.
So you had mentioned the word differential, and that's a key point to Iditarod, especially for fans that are following along on the leaderboard or the GPS trackers or whatever. They always seem to have questions about that. So if I am right, Sean Williams with bib number 2 has to stay approximately 100 minutes longer than Hugh Neff. Is that right?
About that, yeah. What you do is you take your bib number, or the bib number of the last musher, and then you add 2 minutes for each team in between you and that musher. So for number 2, you have the longest differential. If you're number 49, you just add 2 more minutes to your 24. So it's 24 and 2 minutes. So yeah, that's the basic math. And if I start talking anymore, people will realize I flunked math from 6th grade on. So,
well, Toni, there is a question that I have that I've never been asked or even looked up. What happens on that differential if 10 people scratch? Does that change that at all? If let's
Nope.
say it stays the same, even if those folks scratch. Oh, okay. I did not know that information. So also, Toni, just one more thing about these 24s. Last night, before we went on the air, you mentioned this is sort of going to be the lull of Iditarod, and things are really going to start kicking up after all these 24-hour rests. What did you mean by that?
It means that, for fans, this is not the time to really be focusing on the GPS. It is nice today. We were watching to see when Brent Sass came in. We're watching to see how the chase pack with the CV squared and Hugh Neff and Ryan Reddington, who all chased him out of Ophir, though I guess he chased Dallas out of Ophir. And all trying to see how that shakes out and who, may push even further than cripple to 24 in Ruby or further. I don't expect any of them to do that, but I've been wrong before. But as far as why it's just a lull, it's because all of the teams aren't moving. Most of them are going to be relaxing at least for the bulk of today and tomorrow as they're taking their 24. And so this is the time that you can get your chores done, a nap in, make sure you've got food for the weekend when the race really starts.
And it is not uncommon at all to have a big group of mushers, especially those front runners, all parked for that 24-hour rest. And then here comes somebody right out of the blue, way back in the middle or further back in the pack, and all of a sudden they're leading by 8, 9, 10 hours. And that does not mean that they're winning the race. Isn't that right?
For the most part, yeah. Other than the fact that Aaron Burmeister is kind of the dark horse and spoiler at this point in all of that, because he's hoping to slingshot over everybody taking their 24 to at least meet up with the front runners that he's been running with until stopping for his mandatory. To stay in there with hopefully fresh enough dogs that he's not going to then have to play catch up. But they also have their 8-hour mandatory rest on the Yukon. So that's another calculated strategy to add into when you're going to rest your dogs, how you're going to rest your dogs.
So let's talk a little bit about those checkpoints. We've been covering 3 checkpoints a day here on our coverage, and tonight we're going to talk a little bit about Ruby, Galena, and Nulato. And the run from Cripple to Ruby is pretty intense. It's all overland running, lots of hills, lots of hard work and trail there. And then when they reach Ruby, that's the first checkpoint on the Yukon, and then they're on the Yukon for the next couple of days or so, depending how folks are running. And I have been to Ruby. When we did our Serum Run trip 2 or 3 years ago, we stopped in Ruby and spent some time there. A very interesting spot to either get up or down to Ruby, a huge incline hill that you have to carry up from the river on down. And then, of course, you make your way down the Yukon to Galena, and a very hospitable village there. A lot of times they stay at the community center or community hall. I know that they're not doing that this year because of COVID precautions and all that, so they're going to be having the checkpoint on the river, unless they change that from my last reading. And then further down on the river is Nulato, and then, of course, they're going to work their way over to Caltag, and we'll talk about that one tomorrow. But this all comes into play with the difference in route between the northern route and the southern route. And I'm going to quickly pull up the race map so I don't get this wrong. The northern route of the race is held on the even year. So this year here, since we're at 2022, and the split between the two routes is at Ophir. So this year they're going to go from Ophir to Cripple to Ruby, Galena, Nulato, and then hook up to Caltag. And then Caltag is sort of at the top of that circle. And then on odd years, which was last year and of course next year, they're going to go from Ophir to Iditarod to Shaktoolik, excuse me. Which is it, Toni?
Nope, not Shaktoolik. Not Shaktoolik. Shaktoolik's on the west coast.
It is.
Shagaluk.
And then Anvik, Grayling, Eagle Island, and then on till Caltag. So they're going to make that sort of lower portion of the circle. And, both of them have their pluses and minuses. And I know a lot of mushers will say which they prefer, whether it's that northern or southern route. And then, of course, for several years back in the past, I think 2 years in the last 15 or so, they did an alternate route where they went from Fairbanks and spent a heck of a lot of time on the rivers, and then, of course, hooked up to the original trail further down. Did I miss anything other than that mess up with the checkpoint?
I don't think so. Like you said, the mushers all seem to prefer one or the other depending on the musher. I believe they say the southern route is the harder of the two. There on the Yukon, I guess the way the wind blows factors into that. But for the most part, the southern route is, I believe, the original route of the Iditarod, as it does go through the ghost town of Iditarod, which is what the trail system and the race is named for. And then they wanted to spread the wealth, so to speak, and give more villages a chance to not only host a checkpoint, but to see the dog teams come through. So they've alternated. And I don't remember what year that started, but it's been quite a few decades.
Yeah, it has, at least since I've been following the race, and that's, 30 years or so. And I've also heard mushers will say their Iditarod is not complete until they do both routes, that northern and southern route. I think anybody that finishes the race and gets the belt buckle as a rookie, I think they're probably content to call themselves an Iditarod finisher, but there are some crazy competitors out there, and they want to make sure that they do both routes. Isn't that right?
Oh yeah, it seems to be whether you're a musher or a volunteer, you get bit by that bug, and then suddenly you need to do more, and you need to see more, and you need to do more. And so, yeah, completing that full circle there on the Yukon is something very important to most of the mushers.
So we have two quick stories that we want to mention tonight. One about some sportsmanship, and another about the Faces of Iditarod. And I know we didn't talk about that, but I know you know a little bit about that one. So let's talk about the sportsmanship. I know this was a story late last night, early this morning. One of our fans reached out to me and said, this is a story idea that you should cover. And that is how Ryan Reddington gave his spare sled to Michelle Phillips. And what's interesting by the story I read is Ryan Reddington is sponsored by Ryanair, and Ryanair is a really, really discount air carrier over in Europe. I mean, think about Frontier times 3 in terms of just, you're not going to get anything on that airline, not even a bag of peanuts. But he's sponsored by those guys, and I think that's a cool sponsorship to have, Ryanair with Ryan Reddington. And that's just cool to me. But what's the story between he and Michelle?
So Michelle had a rough run into Roan, as most of the teams have reported having similar experiences. But she broke a very important part of her sled that connects her sled to the runner, is my understanding. And so she ran actually from Roan to Nikolai on this broken sled, and Ryan had an extra sled that he had flown in ahead of time. And so when he realized that his sled had survived and was, he said, quote unquote, a healthy sled, he said, he didn't need it, and she was more than welcome to use it. And she said that she was very touched by that, but at the same time, you and I both know, and I think a lot of mushing fans, especially Iditarod fans, know this is just kind of the norm with most mushers. They're more than willing to help out. It doesn't matter that Michelle is one of the top teams that could end up going ahead of Ryan Reddington when all is said and done and everything shakes out. She could end up, ahead of him in the standings. doesn't matter. You don't want to be the reason that your competitor wasn't able to complete the race. Plus, I think a lot of these mushers really are, if not friends, they're friendly. It's a small niche group, and they all stick together, even when they don't always get along. So it was just a really sweet story. One of the reasons why we all follow Iditarod are for those kind of stories. You don't necessarily ever hear about Tom Brady giving up his favorite pair of football cleats to his competing quarterback of the day. So it's a unique part of this sport.
Right. And before I give my musher's perspective on that, do you happen to know if that second sled is all decked out in Reddington green as his other sled is with everything else?
I don't know if they swapped sled bags when they swapped sleds or what, but the video that I saw of her and Mitch later on in the insider coverage, she still had blue as her sled bag. So I don't know if that was Ryan's sled bag or hers.
And that was my perspective of that. And I know we talked about it in our kickoff show about Jeff taking over for Nick and having to have all of his gear along the way. And that goes with sled bags too. I know on my sled, I put things in particular areas. For example, I have a pocket on the front of my sled that I always put my booties in when I'm on races, so I can easily just unzip that pocket and grab a fresh set of booties. I also put my snacks in an individual container in the front of the sled, so I know exactly where they are and I can reach for it. But I can imagine if you do have to keep a sled bag from somebody else on that sled that we talk about, it could make interesting organizational quandaries for Michelle if that's the case, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely is. Every sled is unique to that musher. We've all seen it where they have different construction from just how the sled, is able to stand upright. Your Olsum this year has a carbon fiber sled that is very flexible and able to take him around corners without him actually having to lean the entire sled. He can just lean the sled bag and the handlebars without actually having to move the runners and all of that sort of stuff. So, yeah, one sled bag doesn't fit another sled bag necessarily, and the compartments that they have and the little pockets and hidey holes will be different. So I didn't even think of that when we were talking about this earlier, but that's a really good point to bring up. I would assume that they were able to swap sled bags out, but that's a really good point.
Yeah, on my sleds, that bag is really, really lashed down with zip ties and other types of materials like that. So it would be a real chore to get that undone. And right. It is not uncommon, is it, Toni, for a heck of a lot of mushers to ship out second sleds to McGrath. Right. I know we touched on that last night because often they'll have a bigger or heavier sled as they work their way over the Alaska range, and then they'll take a more streamlined or smaller sled for the remaining portion of the race. And I believe they're allowed to ship another sled to Unacleat. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe I've read that they're able to ship up to 2 sleds, and it's normally one happening right around wherever they're going to take their 24, and then the other one is when somewhere along the West Coast when they're wanting to drop all extra weight. They might return dogs that are great pullers, but they aren't exactly great runners, and so they want more of a streamlined sprint type racing sled and dog team, as opposed to when they're going over the mountain range when they want the strong haul pullers and they wanting to slow their team down, so they're going to add the extra weight of a bigger sled.
Right. And for folks that are listening, it looks like we're going to go over tonight because we still have some things to get to. So bear with us. If you don't have time, you can always hit pause. And that's the beauty of podcasts. You can come back anytime you want. Very similar to Netflix, I guess. So let's talk a little bit about the Faces of Iditarod. And I bring this up because you had mentioned that that the Insider and a bunch of people are stuck in McGrath, or did you say Nikolai, because of the storm. And I know that the official photographer, Jeff Schultz, was there in McGrath, I believe it was, yesterday taking pictures. And I saw a picture of one of Dallas Seavey's dogs, Prophet, and I saw a bunch of other pictures that he does. But I know that you had your picture taken as part of Faces of Iditarod. So tell us about the program, how you got involved or picked to be one of those photos, and sort of how the process works down the trail.
Sure. So Jeff Schultz has been wanting to do this for quite a while. He has been the official photographer of Iditarod since 1982, I believe. It's somewhere in the 80s. And he has documented the race in a brilliant way. He's one of the reasons why I chose to become a photographer. I was always in love with his photos, and I just thought that would be so cool to do that someday. And now that I've seen how he captures those pictures, I'm not hanging out of a plane to get a picture of a dog team ever. So I cannot ever be as awesome as Jeff. But he started to feel like his photography was getting stale. He was having to follow the race and the front runners, and he wasn't able to tell the stories that he wanted to tell. And we're losing a lot of our historical parts of the Iditarod with all of the mushers that are passing, all of the old volunteers that are passing. And so he really wanted to preserve what he could. And I think he's even said that he wishes he had started this decades earlier. But what he does is this year, it looks like anybody who's involved with the race, he's trying to pull aside. He takes one or two snaps of you with a backdrop and a portable light and his camera gear. And then he records your interview. He gives you a card with 5 or 6 questions, I think, on it. And you read the questions and then you answer the questions. And even from the trail, what he's doing is he downloads all of that stuff and then he gets it sent to a cloud where then his wife is the main transcriber. I think they have some sort of internet transcriber that does the initial thing, but we all know AI isn't completely up to date on Iditarod lingo. So you have to still have a human brain and fingers to edit all of the mistakes, because apparently Iditarod is not a word in AI's vocabulary, and neither are many of the villages. And then for the project, he's not just doing mushers and volunteers and officials. He's grabbing fans, and he's also interviewing dogs. Which I think is a really great resource as well, because without the dogs, we don't have Iditarod. And in that case, he's taking their picture, same way that he does with the humans. And then he interviews either the musher or a handler, if available, to give a little backstory on the dog, as well as the bloodlines and sort of where the dog runs most of its time in the team. So it's a really neat project. I'm with Jeff. I wish this had been started years ago, but I'm glad that it's happening now. And he's been able to document so much Iditarod history in just the span of, I think, 3 years now.
And I know that he did a really cool book a few years ago. I believe it was called Chasing Iditarod or something like that. And of course, it was kind of a coffee table photo book, because obviously that's what he does. Do you know if he's going to be doing this as a book project, or is this pretty much strictly online?
I think this project is online because it's ever growing and evolving. He has Chasing Dogs, which is basically his autobiography, really, of being the official photographer of Iditarod. And then after he did that one, he also has a book called Icons of Iditarod. And that one, I think, is what sparked his goal of doing Faces of Iditarod, because he shares some of his photos from past races of important places, people, dogs, items. He's got a page about the Red Lantern. He's got, I believe, a portrait of Susan Butcher and talks about her and that. So I think that's what spurred it, because the next thing you knew, he was talking about this Faces of Iditarod project as he realized a lot of the icons in that book, he was having to go to second and third hand information because that person was no longer with us. So the archive will be immense, I think, once he finishes, if he ever finishes. And it was an honor to be a part of it. He messaged me in 2020, just days before the ceremonial, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to be in your area, and you are going to be one of the Faces of Iditarod." And I was like, "Nope." And I did not win that argument. So it was just a real honor, and it's such a great resource, and I love that he's doing it.
So were you there as a volunteer or as a fan, or how does he catalog folks that are, that aren't mushers or not volunteers, etc.? Right.
So I do believe that he put me down as a volunteer, because I was volunteering the day that he interviewed me. But he does. He has the category of volunteer, race fan, I think official, musher, and then of course dogs. And I don't know that if he has any others, I don't know about that.
and am I correct that for a while, maybe you still do, that's what you're using as your profile picture on social media, is that right?
That is. I think it's going to be my Iditarod month profile picture for quite a few years to come.
And they have a very unique look about them, sort of that misty dark background, and then of course that lighting that really pops. It's a very unique type of a portrait, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's a very small backdrop, something that you would normally see at, I think, like school pictures or whatnot. And then it's not the portrait lighting that I would choose, because it's very good at defining all the things that you're wanting to hide. It's not necessarily glamour lighting, but I think it pops you from the background. And then you can always tell when he's interviewing in a snowstorm, because the snow gets captured in those photos, and I'm kind of jealous that mine doesn't have that effect to it.
Right. And of course, I was attracted to this, to tell this story today, because I saw, I don't know if it was a short video clip or just a bunch of stills of him trying to get a picture of the dog. I don't know if that was the Dallas's dog Prophet or another one, but it's, anybody that's ever tried to take pictures of their dog, that's a real chore in of itself. And you're not going to get them to sit and pose like you would a Labrador Retriever or a Cocker Spaniel.
No, I've taken pictures of sled dogs now for, it's 10 years this year, and even longer if you count just doing it for fun. And they're great if you're back away from them, but once they see that big scary camera and that big flash and everything and the noise that the camera makes, they're a very high-strung dog naturally, and when it's something they don't know, that trust isn't really built into it. They're not used to it. They get skittish. They look sad. And it's not that they are. They're just like, I don't know what that is. And if it's going to go up my bum, I don't want it. That's how it feels when they're looking at me. They just know that this is that torture device that I'm going to take their temperature with or something.
Right. So there you go, guys. You can definitely follow Jeff Schultz on all social media. I know he's even very active on LinkedIn. So you can even follow him there if you like. And you can just search his name, Jeff Schultz, or Iditarod Photographer, and I'm sure he would be one of the first ones to pop up on Google. So let's talk about our musher of the day. Today we're talking about rookie Eric Kelly, and the way we've been doing this over the last few days is Toni goes first, and then I pull up the rear with the information that I know about the musher or sort of my own personal insights. What do you know about Eric?
Eric is one of those mushers that got into it via another musher in 2013. He met musher Newton Marshall, and was able to help him prepare for one of his Iditarods. I think it was 2014, which we all know is the Iditarod that nobody ever talks about because it was just such a hellacious one for the mushers, the dogs not so much. But that really sparked an interest for him. So he went from that to running dogs out of Kathleen Frederick's Shameless Huskies kennel. And then it says in his bio that in 2018, he started building his own kennel. He now has 30 dogs or over 30 dogs of his own. And it's something that the whole family is now involved in. I believe his daughter was set to run the junior Iditarod, but I believe she withdrew. Not sure why, but I do know that she had signed up for it. He's a lot of fun. He's very active on his social media. Great looking dog. So far, it looks to be like a really good rookie run for him. He's right now in 42nd place on the GPS tracker. So he's well on his way. He still has all 14 dogs. Like I said, he's looking really strong for a rookie run. Just a really nice, interesting guy. I mean, if you're friends with Newton Marshall, you got to be cool. But Newton was even his tag sled driver. So just a lot of fun. He took my corner there at the Alaska Native Medical Center like a champ, unlike certain other mushers that I won't name right now. But yeah, just a really neat guy. He really, his goal has been running the Iditarod since starting his kennel in 2018. So he's here 4 years later, which is a pretty incredible accomplishment when he's running his own dogs.
Yeah, that is very impressive, especially, he's only even been up in Alaska a little while, and to start your own kennel and make it to the starting line on your own is a big deal. And as you mentioned, this is his rookie year, and his kennel name is Daybreak Mushing. You can follow him along on daybreakmushing.com. He's very active on Facebook and Instagram, and he was a guest on our show. I guess it was last year, I believe. They're all running together because of COVID. Before he decided to run Iditarod, he was still doing his qualifiers at that point. And I believe, and you could probably know this more than I, he was the musher that had the great big Grateful Dead logo on his sled. Is that right?
I think so. I'm not really into that kind of music, so I think that's who that was, but I wouldn't bet money on me being right either.
So there you go. So, Toni, you said just about everything I was going to mention about Eric. I know he lives right here in the Mat-Su Valley. He lives over in the Knik area, which is a real hotbed of mushing. That's where the Reddingtons have a kennel, as well as many other Iditarod mushers, as well as folks that are training for the race in the next couple of years. That's a place to be if you're going to be in dog mushing, because it connects right there to the Iditarod Trail, and they even have a sign about 20 or 30 miles or so that says Nome this way with an arrow, so you can easily get to Nome right there from his backyard. So lots happening in those necks of the woods, and there's a reason why Joe Reddington and the Reddington family have been there for so many generations now. So that is Eric Kelly. We wish him well. As you mentioned, he's solidly there in sort of that middle of the pack range. Well, he's in 43rd place as the last time I pulled it up. So he's definitely not pulling up the rear for sure. And he is our musher profile of the evening, and it is my choice to pick. And I was sitting here scrolling up and down trying to figure out somebody to pick while you were talking. And I know on our ceremonial or kickoff show, Toni, we both mentioned the name Hannah Lyric, I believe is how you say her last name, a musher from Norway. And I think she would be an interesting person to do a little research on and talk about tonight. What do you think? Or tomorrow, what do you think?
I think that's a great choice. She's looking pretty strong. She's a little bit further back than I expected right now. But I don't trust those Norwegian mushers not to pull out some secret weapons and find her really close to the front of the pack for Rookie of the Year.
Yep, so we're going to talk about Hannah Lyric tomorrow. She is a rookie running out of Norway, as we mentioned, and that should be an interesting show as well. And, of course, we've been asking for comments from our friends that are listening. What do you know about Hannah, or what would you like us to find out about another musher so we could profile them on our musher profiles of the evening in coming nights? So if you have questions or you'd like us to follow somebody, please reach out to us on social media. Toni, how can folks follow you over on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter as @ToniShellAK.
And is that the same for Facebook?
It's just Toni Shell on Facebook.
Okay, all right.
I didn't have to compete with any other Toni Shell over there.
Okay, and look for that Jeff Schultz Iditarod inspired photo. You cannot miss it. You will see her photo, and it looks very, very similar to all the other photos that he has taken in that Faces of Iditarod campaign. So check that out, and of course you could follow me over on Facebook or Twitter by searching @Robert Forto, that's Forto, or following our page @Dogworks Radio on all the platforms for sure. So anything else before we go, Toni?
Nope. I think we've covered most of it for the evening. Like I said, today and most of tomorrow is just going to be a lot of rest for the musher and the dogs. So I think we've covered everything.
Very good. So on behalf of my co-host, Toni Reitter, this is Robert Forto, Reitter. Reitter? Reitter.
I was going to be like, where did that come from? You've said it right every night so far.
Toni Reitter. Toni Reitter, my co-host tonight. And my name is Robert, and we will see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.
From Dogworks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for Dogworks Radio.
So earlier, you learned about First Paw Coffee Company. Now I'm going to tell you about its Trailbreaker Blend. First Paw Coffee Company's Trailbreaker Blend is inspired by our love of the Northern Lights, frosty paws, and sled dog trails. How cool is that? The Trailbreaker Blend is a private label premium blend that was developed just for them. It's a medium dark roast from Central and South America, highlighting flavors of brown sugar, hazelnut, and plum. Be sure to go to ak.dog/free and enter to win a bunch of cool prizes. That's ak.dog/free.